At 10:47 p.m., inside a quiet room, a 7'1" giant bows his head. He looks down at a box of his late mother's things. Shaq gently holds an old cassette player from 1997. He wants to find the shop owner, who repaired it for free years ago. He wants to say a late thank you. But that small electronics shop in St. Louis is about to close forever. The city ordered the 61-year-old owner to leave in 82 days. She has no money to rent a new shop. Shaq decides to go find her right away, but he faces harsh city laws and big road projects. His time is running out fast. Can this basketball legend save his mother's last memory before the bulldozers destroy everything? This is a story about a giant man and one small machine. It is a story about pride, kindness, and a debt that money alone could never repay. The lamp in the corner gave off a soft yellow light. Shadows stretched long across the quiet living room. Shaq sat alone in his big leather chair. His knees cracked when he shifted his weight. 19 seasons in the NBA had left their mark on his body. His back ached in ways that never fully went away. He wore a plain black t-shirt. Nothing fancy, nothing that said superstar, just a tired man going through an old box. The clock on the wall ticked softly behind him. Outside, the street stayed silent and empty. The box said Mom's Things in faded marker. Shaq's mother, Lucille, had passed away. He still had not opened most of her boxes. Tonight felt different. Something pulled him toward this one box more than the others. His huge hand reached inside and pulled out a small black cassette player. Dust covered the buttons. The plastic felt cool against his fingers. The brand name read Panasonic, model RQ, V60. He held it the way someone holds something they are afraid to break. He turned it over slowly. A small yellow sticker was stuck to the back. The ink had faded to a pale purple color, almost gone after so many years. It read, Miller's Analog Repair, 4127, Cherokee Street, St. Louis, Missouri. Repaired by Martha M. Cost, $0. A note under it said, Kindness already paid the bill. Shaq stared at those words for a long time. His chest felt tight. This was the machine his mother loved the most. He remembered the sound of her footsteps in the kitchen at night. She used to play old gospel songs on it every night. The music helped her sleep through years of joint pain. Shirley Caesar's voice used to fill their small kitchen. The smell of her cooking still lived somewhere in his memory, tangled up with that same music. He remembered her standing at the stove, swaying slightly to the rhythm, while pots simmered behind her. Back then, he never thought much about that small machine. It was just part of the background noise of home. Shaq closed his eyes. He could almost hear his mother humming along. The grief had never really left him. It just stayed quiet, waiting in the corners of ordinary nights like this one. He set the cassette player gently on his lap. His mind drifted back almost 30 years. Back to a cold winter in 1997, long before most fans had ever heard his name shouted in arenas. Back then, Shaq was already a famous player. Big contracts, big shoes, big shadow on every court he walked onto. Reporters followed him everywhere he went. But his mother never changed her ways. She still counted every dollar. She still patched her own clothes instead of buying new ones. She never once asked him for anything extra. That winter, her cassette player broke down. She brought it to repair shops near their home in Orlando. Every shop laughed at the old machine and turned her away. One man told her flat out that fixing it would cost more than buying a new one. So Lucille did something stubborn. She packed the broken player and rode a train to St. Louis. She was visiting family there anyway, and she refused to leave the machine behind. The train ride took most of a day, rattling slowly through small towns and open fields. She held the broken cassette player on her lap the entire trip, wrapped carefully in an old towel. A stranger told her about a small shop on Cherokee Street. A woman named Martha worked there. People said she could fix anything that still had a single working wire inside it. Lucille walked in, with no appointment and very little hope. Martha looked at the machine for a long moment, turning it over carefully in her hands. Then she rolled up her sleeves and got to work, without saying much at all. 6 hours later, the cassette player worked again. Martha refused to take a single dollar for her time. She just smiled and told Lucille to go enjoy her music in peace. Lucille tried twice to press a few bills into her hand, but Martha simply folded her fingers shut each time. In the end, Lucille left with nothing but gratitude and a working machine. Shaq opened his eyes again, back in the present moment. He picked up his phone and typed the shop's old address into a map app. His thumb hovered over the screen for a second before he pressed search. A red pin dropped onto a worn brick building on Cherokee Street. The photo showed peeling paint and a crooked sign hanging from one rusty hinge. He zoomed in on the small storefront image, studying every detail he could find. The street view looked nothing like the busy world he usually lived in. He scrolled further and found a local news article. The headline made his stomach drop. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch had just published it that week, buried under bigger city stories. The article said the city planned to widen Cherokee Street for new traffic lanes. Old shops along the road faced eviction within 82 days. Families who had worked there for decades now faced sudden uncertainty. One line stood out above the rest. Martha Miller's repair shop now owed $4,217.83 in back property taxes. City workers had already started the process to seize her property. Shaq read the number twice, just to be sure his eyes had not tricked him. If the shop closed, the woman who once helped his grieving mother would lose everything. He felt something heavy settle in his chest, pressing down like a stone. He scrolled through more of the article, looking for any other details. A short paragraph mentioned other shop owners on the same block, already packing boxes and saying quiet goodbyes. The whole street seemed to be disappearing piece by piece. He had to go. There was no question in his mind anymore. The only question left was how to do this the right way. Shaq leaned back in his chair, phone still in his hand. Part of him wanted to fix this the easy way, the fast way, the way money usually solved things. He could call the mayor's office tonight. He could wire $100,000 by morning. He could send a team of lawyers to handle everything from a comfortable distance. Each option felt fast, clean, and completely wrong for what this situation truly needed. None of them honored the quiet kindness Martha had once shown his mother. But another voice in his head stopped him cold. It was the voice of his stepfather, Philip Harrison, steady and firm even after all these years. Years ago, Harrison had told him something simple but firm. If you throw money in a proud man's face, you don't help him. You shame him. Shaq had never forgotten those words. Harrison had said this to him once, after Shaq tried to give a struggling neighbor cash outright. The neighbor had refused politely, and young Shaq never understood why, until years later. Martha had not fixed that machine for money. She had fixed it out of pure kindness, asking for nothing back in return. Shaq understood that kind of pride better than most people ever could. He grew up watching his mother stretch every paycheck until it nearly snapped. He knew what it felt like to refuse charity, even when you badly needed help. If he showed up waving cash, Martha might slam the door in his face. Worse, she might feel like a charity case instead of a respected woman who had earned everything she had. He sat with that thought for a long while, turning it over again and again in his mind. Money had solved many problems in his life, but this felt different. This problem needed his presence, not just his bank account. So Shaq made a decision that night. He would go himself, quietly, with no security and no cameras following his every move. He would arrive simply, as Lucille's son, not as an NBA legend chasing headlines. He pulled an old canvas duffel bag from his closet. No logos, no flashy gear, just a plain bag for a plain trip across the country. He stood quietly in his bedroom for a moment, the bag open and waiting on the bed. There was no big plan yet, only a clear sense of where he needed to be. He packed light, a few clothes, his phone, and the cassette player wrapped carefully in a soft cloth. He held it like something fragile and precious, almost like it might break if he gripped it too tightly. The next morning, St. Louis greeted him with cold rain and gray skies. Cherokee Street looked almost empty at 9:15 in the morning, the kind of quiet that felt heavier than usual. Shaq stepped out of a rented sedan, nothing flashy, nothing that drew attention from passing cars. A gray hoodie covered his head over his plain black shirt. He locked the car and stood for a moment, studying the street before walking forward. Old brick buildings lined both sides, many with faded signs and boarded windows. Water dripped from awnings along the quiet block. Most shop windows looked dark and locked. The street felt tired, like it was waiting for something bad to happen, holding its breath under the gray sky. Under one awning, an older man struggled to wipe rain off his thick glasses. A worn leather mailbag hung heavy on his shoulder, stuffed with envelopes that smelled faintly of wet paper. Shaq walked closer, and his huge frame blocked the weak morning light. The man jumped slightly, but quickly relaxed, thinking he saw just another tall stranger passing through. "Excuse me," Shaq said in a low, careful voice. "Do you know a shop owner named Martha? She fixes old electronics." The man, named Gary, sighed and let out a small cloud of warm breath into the cold air. He had walked this route for 30 years, rain or sun. "Martha's the heart of this whole street," Gary said. "Back in '98, the mail service went on strike. My family had no food that month. She left a bag of flour at my door. Without saying a word, he continued. Never asked for thanks. Never told anyone what she did for us that winter." Gary's voice turned sharper, edged with frustration. "Now the city's raising her tax bill to over $4,000. They want her gone, so some shipping company can build a parking lot." He looked Shaq up and down, sizing up the stranger in front of him. "If you've got money, don't just hand it to her directly. Martha would rather go hungry, with her pride, than take a handout," Gary warned. "She's stubborn like that. Always has been, since I was a young man myself." Shaq nodded slowly, taking in every word like it mattered more than anything else he had heard all week. This was exactly the warning he needed before walking through that door. He thanked Gary for his honesty, and the old mailman gave a small, tired smile in return. Gary adjusted his heavy bag and continued down the street, disappearing slowly into the gray morning mist. He thanked Gary and turned toward a faded blue door a few steps away. Old paint curled off the wood like dry skin peeling under years of weather. At 10 o'clock sharp, Shaq pushed the door open. A heavy brass bell above the frame rang out, with a low, tired clang that echoed through the small room. The ceiling inside stood barely 7 feet tall. Shaq had to duck his head and curve his back just to fit through the narrow doorway. A slow ceiling fan spun above him, its blades dangerously close to his skull. His size 23 sneakers squeaked loudly against the old tile floor with every careful step. The smell hit him first. Burnt solder, dusty paper, and old machine oil filled the cramped space. Shelves climbed to the ceiling, packed with vacuum tubes, and ancient radios stacked tight against each other. Old Zenith radios sat beside silver Pioneer turntables. Every shelf told a small piece of forgotten history, layered in dust and quiet patience. A row of clocks ticked out of rhythm, with each other near the back wall. Some still worked perfectly, their hands moving steady despite their age. Others sat frozen at whatever moment they had stopped, decades ago. Behind the counter sat a woman, with gray-streaked hair, a magnifying lamp bent low over her hands. Thin smoke curled up from a soldering iron in her grip, rising slow toward the ceiling. She looked up, without a hint of surprise or fear at the giant filling her doorway. She simply pushed her glasses higher on her nose and kept her hands steady. "If you've got something broken, set it on the table," she said calmly. "And please duck your head. That fan won't survive another hit." Her voice carried the steady patience of someone who had repeated similar lines 1,000 times before. She did not seem impressed by size or strength, only by what a person carried in their hands. Shaq almost smiled despite the heaviness in his chest. This woman clearly feared nothing, not even a giant stranger blocking her sunlight. He had barely settled into the cramped space when the back door swung open hard. A man in a sharp navy suit walked in, holding a tablet and a leather folder under one arm. His shoes shined like glass, completely out of place among the grease and dust covering every surface. His name, Julian Vance, was stitched neatly on his folder in silver letters. He moved with the confidence of someone who had never once been told no. His eyes scanned the cluttered shop with obvious distaste, as if the dust itself offended him. Vance worked for a company called Vanguard Logistics, along with the city government. His voice came out smooth, polite, and cold as steel pulled from a winter lake. "Mrs. Miller," he said, not bothering to look at Shaq at all. "Your tax penalty remains unpaid at $4,217.83. The city has approved an expedited removal process," Vance continued. "Your 82 days have now been reduced to just 10 days, starting today." Martha's hands stayed perfectly steady as she set down her soldering iron. She did not flinch. She did not raise her voice, not even slightly. Vance finally glanced toward Shaq, standing silent like a wooden statue in the corner shadows. "Is your delivery man here early today? You might want to tell him to start packing your boxes," Vance added, with a thin, cold smile. "The bulldozers arrive next week, ready or not." Martha's jaw tightened, but her words stayed calm and clear, cutting through the tension in the room. "My father built this counter back in 1952 with his own 2 hands. I have exactly $14.12 left in my register today," she said. "But the law gives me 10 days, and I intend to use every single one of them. Now get out of my shop," she finished, "before I show you what this wrench is really for." For a tense second, Vance simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then his mouth curled into a thin, practiced smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. Vance shrugged, unbothered, and walked back out the same way he came. The bell above the door rang again, sharp and final, swallowed quickly by the silence. After the door shut, the small shop fell into a heavy silence. Dust floated slowly through the gray light from the front window. Shaq finally stepped forward, careful not to bump the ceiling fan above his head. Martha exhaled slowly, her shoulders dropping just slightly now that the threat had passed for the moment. She picked up her soldering iron again, hands steady despite everything that had just happened. He reached into his coat and pulled out the old cassette player, wrapped gently in its soft cloth. He set it on the worn wooden counter, without a word, letting the silence speak first. Martha removed her reading glasses and stared at the machine in front of her. Her fingers, stained gray with solder, traced the faded yellow sticker she had written herself decades ago. "Lucille," she whispered, almost too soft to hear, over the slow hum of the ceiling fan. "She was a wonderful woman. She used to sit right on that stool, telling me about her son. She worried so much about him getting hurt playing basketball down in Florida," Martha said, her eyes shining, with sudden tears she did not bother to hide. Shaq lowered himself onto a low wooden stool nearby, knees pressed almost to his chest. He still had not told her who he really was, and for now, he did not plan to. "Why don't you sell all this and pay off the debt?" he asked quietly. "Then you could finally rest, maybe move somewhere warmer." Martha shook her head firmly, gesturing toward the towering shelves of old radios and clocks lining every wall. "This isn't junk, young man. That grandfather clock belonged to a soldier who never made it home from Normandy," she said. "That radio kept a widow company for 40 long years, every single night. If I throw these away, their memories turn to dust," she explained. "I won't let that happen, not while I'm still breathing and able to stand at this counter." She picked up a small silver locket from a nearby shelf, turning it gently in her fingers. This belonged to a young bride who never got to grow old with her husband. People forget these stories so easily. Shaq felt something shift deep inside his chest. He finally understood why his mother had never wanted a brand new machine, no matter how many times he had offered to buy her one. She had always told him that new things forgot too quickly, while old things remembered everything. He had laughed at the time, not realizing how true her words really were. Some things were not about money. They carried people inside them, long after those people were gone, humming quietly in old wires and worn buttons. He thought about how easy it would have been to never find that address. He thought about how close he came to leaving that box unopened forever. Fate, it seemed, had other plans for this quiet night. The next morning arrived gray and cold, just like the day before. At 8:30 sharp, Julian Vance returned to the shop, this time with backup trailing close behind him. This time he brought 2 city inspectors and a uniformed police officer trailing behind him. They moved with quick, official steps, clipboards already in hand. The inspectors claimed the shop violated several fire safety codes. They slapped bright orange condemned stickers across every shelf in sight, working fast and without much care. Their boots left muddy tracks across the worn tile floor Martha kept spotless every single day. One inspector barely glanced at the machines before marking them for removal, treating decades of history like ordinary trash. One inspector moved carelessly, knocking over an old wooden radio from 1942. It hit the concrete floor and cracked straight down the middle, splitting old wood that had survived decades. Martha gasped and dropped to her knees instantly. Her hands trembled as she tried to gather the broken wooden pieces, fingers shaking against the cold floor. She pressed the cracked wood against her chest, as if she could somehow hold it back together through sheer will alone. Nobody in the room moved to help her, except for one giant figure standing silently nearby. Shaq stood tall in the doorway, his huge frame blocking most of the gray morning light. Old anger from his younger years rose up fast inside him, hot and sudden. He could have snapped that inspector's wrist with barely any effort at all. But he remembered his stepfather's old lesson about responding, not reacting, even when it felt unfair. If he used force now, police would arrest him on the spot. Martha would lose the shop immediately, along with whatever dignity remained after today. So Shaq stayed perfectly still, planting himself like a steel wall between the workers and the next shelf. The officer hesitated, unwilling to step closer to him. While he stood guard, his eyes scanned the boxes already marked for removal. Many machines inside were old Emerson electric fans, built right there in St. Louis decades ago, back when the city still made things with its own hands. A memory surfaced from something he had read once about state heritage laws. Missouri protected certain private collections with historic value from forced destruction as long as certain conditions were met. If a collection held over 100 registered historic items, the law required a long review before anyone could touch it. That review took 6 full months to complete, far longer than 10 short days. Hope flickered quietly inside him for the first time since arriving in St. Louis. He counted the shelves in his mind, certain Martha's collection easily passed that number. This single fact might be enough to change everything. Shaq quietly pulled out his phone and began photographing pages from Martha's handwritten logbook. Each page recorded decades of careful repair work, written in neat, looping handwriting. The book listed over 1,200 machines fixed across 40 years of service. Every page proved exactly how much history this small shop truly held inside its cramped walls. Each entry included a date, a customer name, and a short note about the repair. Some notes mentioned soldiers, widows, and tired factory workers who could not afford anything new. Shaq realized this logbook was not just paperwork. It was a quiet record of an entire neighborhood's life. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, the clock was ticking louder than ever. The city council's eviction hearing was set for 9 the next morning, with no room left for delay. Shaq had only 18 hours left to act. He called the St. Louis Industrial Heritage Museum, hoping someone there could help before it was too late. He paced the small motel room while he waited on hold, the phone pressed tight against his ear. Outside his window, rain kept falling steadily over the quiet street below. The museum's director, Dr. Arlene Reyes, had a calendar packed full with wealthy donors. Her assistant refused to schedule any last-minute meeting, no matter how he explained the situation. Shaq decided he could not wait around for a phone call to work. He drove straight to the museum himself. No appointment, no warning, just urgency pushing him forward. When the heavy glass doors opened, his 7-foot frame stopped every visitor in their tracks. Security guards froze, unsure exactly how to respond to the man standing before them. He walked calmly to the front desk, his voice polite, but firm despite the pressure building in his chest. "I need 5 minutes with Dr. Reyes. Tell her a piece of St. Louis history is about to be destroyed tomorrow morning." A young receptionist hesitated, glancing nervously toward a hallway lined with framed photographs. Minutes passed slowly, while Shaq waited near a glass case full of old factory tools. Finally, a door opened, and a woman in a sharp blazer stepped out, studying his face with careful curiosity. He explained everything quickly. The logbook, the 100-item rule, The 10 days left on the clock. Dr. Reyes listened without interrupting once, her expression growing more serious with every sentence. By the time he finished speaking, she was already reaching for her own phone. She promised to attend the hearing herself the next morning, documents ready in hand. The next morning, the city council chamber buzzed with quiet tension. Julian Vance stood at the front, presenting slides about a modern highway expansion, his tone confident and rehearsed. He called Cherokee Street's old shops an industrial slum that needed to disappear for progress. His words were smooth, confident, and completely cold, void of any real feeling. Martha sat in the front row, wearing her darkest old coat. She gripped a worn faux leather purse tightly in both hands, knuckles pale against the fabric. She had barely slept the night before, replaying every possible outcome in her mind. Part of her had already accepted defeat, bracing herself for the worst news of her life. Suddenly, the heavy chamber doors swung open with a loud creak. Every head in the room turned at once, conversation dying mid-sentence. Shaq walked in slowly, pulling back his gray hoodie. Whispers rippled through the crowd before falling into total silence, like the room itself was holding its breath. Local reporters scrambled, pointing their cameras straight at him. Nobody expected to see him here, in this small city hearing tucked away from any spotlight. He walked to the podium and leaned down, careful to let the microphone catch his deep, steady voice. He did not mention money. He did not mention fame or his long career. Instead, he placed the old cassette player gently on the glass table in front of him. He reached out and pressed the play button, letting the room go still around him. A cracked, warm voice filled the silent room. It was Lucille, singing a familiar old gospel song from decades ago, her voice carrying through the speakers like a memory brought back to life. The sound felt impossibly old and impossibly alive at the same time. Martha covered her mouth with one hand, recognizing the voice instantly after all these years. "This isn't a broken machine," Shaq said quietly. "This is my mother's voice. She raised me through hard times with almost nothing to her name. The woman sitting right there fixed this for free when we had no money at all," he continued. "If you destroy her shop, you destroy a piece of this city's soul." A murmur swept through the crowd, but nobody dared to speak yet, all eyes shifting between Shaq and the woman beside him. Martha pressed a trembling hand against her chest, unable to look away from the small machine on the table. For a moment, the whole chamber seemed frozen in place, caught between the old gospel song and the silence that followed it. Even Julian Vance stood still, his confident posture cracking just slightly at the edges. Then Dr. Arlene Reyes stood up and walked toward the podium, papers in hand, her steps quick and certain. She held up an emergency document for everyone to see. The museum officially recognized the Miller Analog Collection as protected cultural heritage, effective immediately under state law. Shaq then announced something the whole room did not expect. He pledged $5 million to fund a brand new heritage preservation wing at the museum, right there in front of the cameras. The council members exchanged quick glances, then called for an immediate vote. Every single member voted to cancel the eviction order on the spot, without a single objection. A wave of applause broke out across the chamber, rising louder with every passing second. Reporters typed furiously on their phones, already drafting headlines for the evening news. Julian Vance stood frozen near his slides, his polished folder slipping from his hands. It hit the floor with a soft, final thud that nobody bothered to pick up. 6 months later, the museum held a bright grand opening for its new heritage wing. Sunlight poured through tall glass windows onto polished floors that smelled faintly of fresh paint. A small crowd gathered near the entrance, holding programs and pointing toward the new exhibits. Local news cameras stood ready near the front, capturing the quiet excitement in the air. Martha's old shop had been rebuilt inside, down to the smallest detail. The same oak counter, the same smell of solder and old paper, carefully recreated piece by piece. Martha wore a fresh apron stitched with the museum's logo across the chest. She patiently guided 3 young kids from Cherokee Street through soldering tiny copper wires her voice calm and patient. One little girl asked her why old radios still mattered in a world full of phones. Martha smiled and told her that some things deserve to be remembered, not replaced. The girl nodded slowly, watching the soldering iron with new respect. She smiled wide, her face glowing with quiet pride and pure happiness. The years of worry had finally lifted from her shoulders, replaced by something steadier. Nearby, Shaq sat on the same low wooden stool he remembered from that first cold morning. He handed Martha a plain white envelope, his expression calm and warm. Inside sat a check for exactly $4,217.83. The note read, "Consulting fee for restoring Lucille O'Neill's memory." It was the exact same number that once threatened to take everything from her. Now that same number returned to her, wrapped in respect instead of fear. Martha's eyes filled with tears as she read the careful handwriting. This time, the tears came from pride, not from fear, and her hands no longer trembled. Together, they reached for the old Panasonic player sitting between them on the smooth glass table. Shaq pressed play one more time, letting the old machine speak again. Soft gospel music drifted through the bright museum hall, warm and steady. Golden afternoon light poured down through the high glass dome above them, settling quietly over the whole room like a blessing. Children laughed somewhere near the new exhibit, their voices mixing gently with the old recorded song. Martha closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music carry her back to a winter night 30 years earlier. Shaq watched her quietly, his huge hands resting calmly on his knees. He thought about his mother, about her stubborn pride, and about the kindness that had outlived her. Some debts, he realized, could never truly be paid back in dollars. They could only be honored, carried forward, and passed on to someone else who needed it. Outside the museum windows, Cherokee Street carried on with its ordinary morning noise. A new generation of repair tools waited inside the old oak counter, ready for hands not yet born to use them. The cassette player kept turning, its small wheels spinning steadily under the warm light. Lucille's voice rose once more, filling the room with a song that refused to be forgotten. This story is a fictional tribute, written with deep respect for Shaquille O'Neal's life and his mother's memory. Some names and details are imagined to honor the quiet kindness people show each other every day.